Good morning for all of those in listening to this webinar in India, and good afternoon to all of those listening to this webinar in Australia. My name is Jim Verghese. I am the National Chair of the Australia-India Business Council, and it's a great privilege to moderate this session today on this very important healthcare topic. Before I commence this moderation of this webinar, I should like to do the welcome to country, which we do in Australia as an important way of acknowledging the traditional owners of our country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we have gathered here today in every part of our nation here in Australia. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, for they hold the memories, the tradition, the cultures, and hopes of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across our nation here in Australia. The Australia-India Business Council was established in 1986, and it was founded to foster the bilateral relations between Australia and India. We're the only premier non-profit organization with a mission to promote trade dialogue between India and Australia through nurturing and maintaining close relationships in both Australia and India. We thrive on a business-to-business relationships. The AIBC is a national membership organization with chapters in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and Canberra. And we maintain close relationships with federal and state government agencies, the diplomatic corps, and industry bodies. Now today, this webinar is really from our health care industry chapter with whom Dr. Tanya Uni chairs very skillfully and has really brought the message across to our colleagues in both India and Australia. And it's important that we showcase two factors in this panel discussion. So what we're hoping to do in this seminar today is to unlock the true potential in the clinical trial and research market for both Australia and India. These trials and research open broader economic opportunities in health economics, medical monitoring, scientific leadership, to name a few, that will help pharmaceutical companies, medical technology companies, and other related entities. And it's my pleasure now, and very appropriate now, to introduce Vish Viswanathan, who on behalf of the AIBC New South Wales President, Samir Arora, and Vish is of course also on the management committee of the New South Wales AIBC, and also he plays a very important role as our national industry chair for Make in India, which has been very active in this last 12 months in promoting the bilateral relationship. So without further ado, I'll call on Vish to do an introduction to this webinar and how it's going to work, but also acknowledge very importantly our sponsors, NIB, for this webinar. Over to you, Vish.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon in Australia, or good morning in India. Ladies and gentlemen, first, I want to pay my respects to the original owners of this beautiful land and all elders past and present. It's my privilege to welcome you, representing Mr. Samir Arora, the President of New South Wales Chapter of Australia-India Business Council, and on my own behalf, and our management committee members of the New South Wales. Today, we're all eager to participate in the exciting forum on a topic which is very relevant today and close to our hearts, shaping the future of clinical trials. As we quickly look back, the year 2020 has impacted all of us individually and collectively as a humanity in many ways. And it will be several years before normalcy is restored to the life of the common man. However, the light is emerging at the end of this dark COVID-19 tunnel. That is the clinical technological leadership, which is being demonstrated globally on a day-to-day basis to minimize and possibly eradicate the effects of this deadly disease. Although clinical trials are one of the pharmaceutical industry's most painful and costly processes, technology could shape the future of clinical development and fast-track improvements in the quality of life for the mankind. It is heartening to note that both Australia and India are demonstrating such technologies in clinical technologies. As we are doing this seminar, we have just received a media release from Honorable Kevin Andrews. She has released a media release on the Australia-India partner, Karen Andrews, Honorable Karen Andrews, my apologies. And she has announced Australia-India partner on COVID-19 research. And that is, they've got 6 projects which has been granted. And then they will be announcing, they have announced a further $15 billion to extend the research fund for another 4 years, which gives us a lot of opportunities for many of the Australian businesses to apply for this and research organizations for this fund. So please keep watch on this, and then please go into the websites and business.gov.au for further information on these grants. So this is a very timely announcement, and thank you, Minister. Today, we are all going to listen to the eminent speakers from both Australia and India on several topics of current interest, such as research on to stem cells, clinical trials in Australia and India, regulatory aspects, specific research projects and possible synergies, genomics, digital health, and use of artificial intelligence in drug development and clinical trials. And we're also looking forward to an interesting discussion forum led by Dr. Tanya Unni, National Chair of the Health Chapter of the Australia-India Business Council, and also a highly accomplished businesswoman and a professional. It's also equally my pleasure to introduce our next speaker and sponsor of this important webinar, which is from NIB Insurance. And representing NIB is, we have Maria Non, a Business Development Manager, and who are our major supporters from in New South Wales. We have a long relationship with NIB, and we value their partnership for their involvement with AIBC. For coming years, we're going to have a number of events planned with them. And without much ado, I would like to welcome Maria Non to be our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Vish, for that introduction. And upfront, I'd like to express the appreciation is mutual. NIB also appreciates our partnership with AIBC. And in particular, I'd like to thank you, Jim, Samir, who's not here with us, unfortunately, today, and Dr. Tanya for inviting us to be a part of this very important webinar. I'd like to just take a few minutes to update you on what's happening with NIB. And good morning to all the attendees from India, and good afternoon to all those in Australia. So for those in India, or for those who are not familiar with NIB, NIB is an Australian health insurance company. So we specialize in providing health insurance to Australian residents as well as temporary visitors like international students and international workers. So just to update you over the last couple of months, the initiatives we've taken to support the community and the broader the country and our membership base with through COVID. I'd like to run through a few initiatives that we have done over the last several months. So we launched a 24/7 hotline for our members to access to get help through COVID. We also updated provided updated information on COVID through the Checkup, which is a publication that we disseminate to our members. We also provided access to telehealth for our members, and in alignment with the government legislation, we covered certain telehealth services during COVID. We also rolled out a range of financial hardship assistance support to our members. So we granted premium relief to a number of our members in recognition of the fact that the COVID was not only a health concern, but it also had economic impacts to our members. We donated $1.5 million to community efforts both in Australia and New Zealand. We donated hundreds of thousands of masks to different organizations. We distributed food hampers to international students, and we donated $500,000 to Lifeline, which is an organization looking after mental health. In addition to all these, we've recently partnered with Baitier. So Baitier is also an organization that deals with mental health, particularly with young people, with international students. So together with Baitier, we would like to roll out programs in Australian universities to help international students in particular battle mental illness and just look after their mental health. So just a brief update. NIB is all about continuously improving our service offering. And in particular, we are developing a number of digital tools to help make all transactions from joining, claiming, changing dates, and all that convenient for our members. So some of the projects in the pipeline will enable our members to have a symptom checker on the app. So they just enter what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, and it will direct them to the right treatment or service that they need to pursue. We're also developing a tool that will enable them to find a GP and book it online and have a telehealth consult. And also we're rolling out various payment options, payment platforms like PayPal, Alipay, WeChat Pay. Next slide, please. Just again, to reinforce why NIB is the right partner for our clients and members, we offer competitive and sustainable premiums. We're one of the most competitively priced health insurance companies in Australia. Our products, we have a wide range of products, and we option to our customers by way of level and type of cover. Our processes are simple and tailored so that they're all convenient and streamlined. We are in the process of offering personalized health management programs. We recognize that health is not one size fits all. So we're trying to personalize health management programs. Like I said, we're continuously improving our technology to make it better for our customers to transact with us. And that includes facilitation of transfers from other funds. Lastly, I would just like to brag, if I can. Our products have actually won the CanStar Awards consistently. So the cover for international students, we've won it 4 out of the last 5 years. And for international workers, we've won all 5 awards since CanStar started giving that award out. So in closing, I'd like again to thank AIBC for your support all through the years. And I'd like to invite any of you, if you have any need of health insurance, if you have any questions about any of our products and offering, please feel free to reach out to me. AIBC would have my contact details. And I wish everybody continuous safety and happy holidays. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria. And it's really, we're very pleased to have NIB as our sponsor and a partner. And congratulations on those awards. Well done.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dinesh Palipani. And as you can see, he has a very distinguished career, doctor, lawyer, disability advocate, and he's also co-founder with Disabilities Australia. And he's a doctor on the Gold Coast, the Titans Physical Disability Rugby League team. Can I say, as national chair and as a fellow Queenslander, it's my great privilege to hand over to Dr. Dinesh. Over to you. Might just unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to share a few thoughts with this amazing group. My name is Dinesh. I'm a doctor at the emergency department of the Gold Coast University Hospital. And I work as a researcher in spinal cord injury at the Griffith University. The reason I have been interested in research is because I have a spinal cord injury myself, which I sustained as a result of an accident nearly 11 years ago. My life changed in that moment, and everything has been very, very different for me, but still good. I'm still very thankful for life. So I had an interest in what is happening with spinal cord injury from the moment I had the accident. We started looking for answers. My family reached out across the globe to see what kind of research was happening in order for me to stand again and walk again and use my hands again. And what we realized is that patients are often so disconnected and disempowered from the research projects that are happening. And it can be a very heartbreaking thing. And some of the responses that we got were very paternalistic as well. And over a period of time, particularly after I finished medical school, I wanted to take some control about what was happening with research. And I wanted to have some control over what results would come out. So over the last couple of years, I had the good fortune of being able to found my own spinal cord injury research project with a couple of very close colleagues. And last year we got $2.1 million in funding to take this project forward. And essentially what we are doing is using thought-controlled rehabilitation with electrical stimulation and drug therapy. And these things have shown some really good results over some trials that have happened in other countries. But this year has been really interesting for us because COVID came around and we had to really pivot because our labs were closed, the university was closed, and we had some experts that we hired for our team that were stuck overseas. When the borders were closed, they were literally in transit and they had to turn around. So this year really taught us about adapting in this environment. And we were able to still get some work done. We had people working remotely. We were able to manage our lab in a way where skeleton staff still went in and did some work. And we've also been able to pivot towards doing some other really important bits and pieces in our work with virtual reality and thought-controlled training. So it's been a fascinating year. And I think the thing that I learned most is that when we get these challenges, we have to use them as opportunities to still try and get some work done and still try and be productive. And fortunately, our funders have been very flexible with us. But I think the most important thing that I've realized is that when there is a want, when there is a drive, and when there's a lot at stake, we are able to get things done. which is what we've seen with the COVID vaccine this year. I don't know if any time in history we've been able to roll out such an important piece of scientific research so quickly to so many people in the world. And sometime next year, a lot of us will likely be vaccinated, which is an incredible thing. So where there's a want and where there are resources, when there's an efficient use of those resources, I think we are able to achieve some really, really impressive things. And I think this needs to start happening across a range of diseases. Because sadly, the other thing I've realized is that within research, there's a lot of empire and career building. We get too focused on publications and growing teams and answering irrelevant questions. So moving forward in the future, I think we need to have relevant clinical trials that answer important questions, and more importantly, bring out working therapies for people, because there are people that are waiting. There are people that are waiting with chronic disease. There are people that are waiting with life-threatening conditions, and time is precious. And I think that we as a scientific and medical community have a responsibility to really focus on bringing some results to them, and focus on bringing working therapies to them. Because I know myself that I look forward to the day where I can stand up and give you this talk. So thank you.
Thanks very much for that very authentic address, and for drawing our attention to what's happened in COVID with the acceleration process, and also the relevance of clinical trials and working therapies. And there's nothing like listening to someone like yourself who is there on the ground and actually doing it. And with that background, it's now appropriate to introduce Dr. Tanya Uni, who is the AIBC Healthcare Chapter Chair. She's also the editor of the AIBC newsletter as well, a person of many hats and many awards. And as you can see from the profile, she's a very active person and fits a lot in a day. Whenever I feel I'm extraordinarily busy, I just look at Tanya's stuff and I feel a lot better. So I'll hand over to Tanya.
Thank you very much, Jim. It is, as a medical practitioner, it gives me a lot of pleasure to be hosting such a very relevant topic, a very relevant webinar. And I want to start by congratulating Dr. Dinesh, who's a good friend of mine, for being the Queensland Australian of the Year. Now, let's move on to our panel discussions. We have Dr. Jyotsna Batra, who is the Associate Professor from Queensland University of Technology. So it gives me a lot of pride to be here sitting with her and taking you through this panel discussion. Welcome, Jyotsna.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's my pleasure to be a part of this excellent event which you're organizing. Hats off to you for organizing such a terrific session, and I'm absolutely pleased to be part of it.
Fantastic. Really, I want to actually know about what kind of research do you do? I'm sure the viewers also want to know about it. What is your field?
Absolutely, Tanya. So I'm a geneticist by training. So my major research focus has been on prostate cancer. I've been working on this field for almost 10 to 12 years now. So I did my PhD in India and came to Australia to start a prostate cancer molecular genetics group here. And we have been looking at the DNA profile of prostate cancer patients and comparing it to healthy individuals, actually to identify the DNA mutations or the changes which can predispose people to this disease. But also, it's not just basic research, because as Dinesh also pointed out, that we absolutely need to do some research which is very clinical oriented and which leads to some great patient outcomes. So this is where the next phase of my research is now currently going. So we have been using these genetic variations. So far we have identified 115 genetic loci which are associated with the risk of prostate cancer. And when you combine them, they have a very high probability of predicting a patient's risk of prostate cancer. So a combination of these genetic variations have already been taken by several companies, and they are actually also using these as a direct-to-consumer test and have been quite instrumental in using these genetic variations for predicting the patient disease. I'm not sure if you have heard about 23andMe, which is actually using some of our results to predict prostate cancer predisposition, and plus the research from other groups and forums where they can predict the possibility of having any health-related disorders, including cancers and other diseases as well.
Fantastic. It's really a clinical trial should be about, it's always about problem and finding solutions. I would like to understand about your collaboration with India and Australia in the clinical trial scenario. Can you take us through that, please?
Absolutely, Tanya. This is an excellent question because I have been working with my Indian partners for a long time. So I did my PhD in asthma genetics, but after coming here, I started working on cancer area. And then I started establishing quite a lot of collaborations with India with respect to clinical trials. Actually, we have been doing some of these clinical trials with respect to the genetic variations, which I have just mentioned, to actually identify if these are similarly capable of predicting a patient's outcome in Indian population as well. As you know that Australia is a multicultural community, it's very important that anything which is discovered in European population or Caucasian population, we look into it in different other populations as well. And my collaboration with India gives me that opportunity, which has been really, really fantastic. So I've been working with AIMS in Delhi and also with several other hospitals, including from Manipal Hospital and Manipal University as well. And Dinesh or somebody else earlier mentioned about the Australia-India Council research grants. And I was also pretty lucky enough to get one of those few years ago to work on ovarian cancer. So we have also been looking at running some clinical trial using some nanoparticle technologies to treat ovarian cancer in early stages. So in that essence, I have been pretty keen on working with Indian collaborative partners, given that they bring lots of opportunities with respect to clinical trials, as well as distinguished research, which can happen in collaboration over there and here, given that we have really complementary expertise in some of the fields.
Isn't this amazing? And it's very important to have people like yourself in this field so that we have more solutions to problems in the world. And, you know, things have changed during COVID-19. Can you take us through what's changed from your perspective in terms of patient recruitment and clinical trial conducting and things like that, and how it's different now?
Yeah, so I would be absolutely happy to talk a little bit about the Australian perspective, and probably later on we will have Amita here talking about Indian perspective. But Australia has been, especially Queensland and the PA hospital, where my association lies, has been maintaining a lot of the clinical trials. There were absolutely lots of restrictions, but we managed it really well by conducting offline trials. Most of the databases were converted into offline or by the post type stuff or online ways. So the questionnaires, which we were used to fill by hands, were mostly being filled by the computer now. And it was so amazing to see how patients were cooperated to all of this. We have to have some of the halt. So my own clinical trial, which was supposed to run, has been halted a little bit. We'll start a little bit later on, which is on actually making a new diagnostic marker for prostate cancer, which we will be starting a little later next year, but that was already in the plan. But the other ones, the other clinical trials, we have been able to send patients the tubes, for example, the saliva tubes, collection for the microbes, which is the collection of the stool samples, which all of those can happen directly by the patients, and they're still completely very well going on. So Australia has emerged as a really excellent place and condition, provided the conditions in this epidemic situation not to stop the research. I mean, we have been very lucky that we did not have as huge impact of COVID, at least in the Queensland, which also has really helped us to continue with the clinical trials and the research work. So our labs were closed for a little while, but then again, we got back into the lab and the working scenario and continued our research from there as well.
It's on that point about how we are functioning in Queensland and in Australia. I heard a very interesting news in the morning. I'm sure a lot of viewers are aware and probably want to also know and ask about it. About the vaccination and the scenario that emerged today. Can you share with us your thoughts on it, please?
Yes, absolutely. So Tanya, you're talking about the COVID-19 vaccine, which actually was kind of a pride of Australia and one of the 4 vaccines which we were actually thinking would come into the market pretty soon. So I've read the news stating that some of the patients came out to be HIV positive after receiving that vaccine, but later on this came out to be false positive, right? So that already tells us that there is a big scope of developing that vaccine further. I think we should really take a pride in finding that Australia did so well, and it was such an accelerated research to make this vaccine to this stage. Normally it would have taken 10 years for a vaccine to reach to this stage, but we reached to this stage within such a short period of time. And the clinical trial was going successful, and this is a false positive result. So we should not be losing hope for that vaccine, and also continue with the clinical trial after we really get onto the bottom of where this failed and where there was the problems. But I think this is not a bad outcome. We are still very hopeful about this vaccine, but at the same time, there are other vaccines coming up, and we should also be looking forward to COVID-free world pretty soon.
That's really, I love that, COVID-free world. And you're quite right. We shouldn't lose the momentum. We shouldn't lose our hope. It is not a setback. It is, yeah, things happen and we have to move forward. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Actually, that takes me to the next point of discussion that we have. And we have Dr. Nagaraj, who's the Deputy CEO of Life Science Queensland, and he has got immense experience in this field, and he's going to take us through different clinical trials in Australia and the amazing opportunities we have. He has got he's very accomplished, and the slide speaks for itself.
Absolutely. Nagaraj, I'm really looking forward to your talk today with respect to the different opportunities Australia is going to provide, and also from the perspective of Life Sciences Queensland. So we welcome you here.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Jyotsna. And also I'd like to thank AIBC for giving me the opportunity to present today about the clinical trials landscape, what's happening in Australia and why Australia. So I've got limited amount of time, but I'll try to skim through why it is very important. Next slide, please. And before I start, I would like to pay my acknowledgement and recognize the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So we would like to recognize their valuable contributions to the Australian and global society. Next slide. So just before I touch into today's topic very quickly on Life Sciences Queensland, again, next slide. So we are a peak industry body based in Queensland, looking after the sector in human health, animal health, and environmental ag and marine biotech. And our basic objectives is influencing public policy within Queensland, working nationally with our peak industry body like AusBiotech to address the issues in the sector, but primarily develop industry by supporting local industry forums and also making new business connections and opportunities. And obviously, India is a very important market for us. Next slide, please. And when I say India is a very important market, early this year in February, Life Sciences Queensland was very privileged to ink a partnership with AIBC in India And my CEO, Claire Blaine and Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw signed off an MOU, and we are looking forward for developing better collaborations between industry, academia, and startups. And that brings to my current slide. We deliver a program called Life Sciences Catalyst, which helps connecting Queensland-based startups and entrepreneurs through various aspects, through mentoring, training, introduction to capital sources and global markets. And it's a program funded by the Queensland government. So if you'd like to be involved with this program, please do reach out to me. Next slide. Likewise, we were very fortunate to receive funding from the Australian Government SME Export Hub, where LSQ, in partnership with Queensland University of Technology and ACTI, we have established the Life Science Innovation Export Hub, again, looking at Queensland-based businesses to interested in export markets into the Asian markets. So we are working with a number of businesses now to see how we can facilitate that seamless interaction. Next slide, please. So that comes to today's topic, and I would like to take it further from where Josna was talking about the UQ vaccine and the importance of clinical trials. Whilst it's unfortunate that the vaccine trial has been abandoned or stopped, but what it shows is the importance of clinical trials in addressing the safety, efficacy issues. Whilst we are fast tracking to address a very quick unmet need, that's a global challenge, it still shows that the work that's been undertaken over here follows very strict processes, regulatory obligations, and I'll touch upon those points, and that tells us why it is very important to undertake these trials in Australia. But before I step into that, as you can see, it is a very important market in Australia, where we have a more than $4.9 billion worth of biomedical pharma industry that's happening and driving that sector, both from R&D through manufacturing, and clinical trials form a very big part of this ecosystem. Every year, there's more than 500,000 participants who across the ecosystem that participate in clinical trials, with over 1,300 trials conducted in Australia, and 7,000 people employed in the sector, and 63% of these trials are involved with industry. So this is there in a report by MTP Connect, which was done with LEK Consulting and available out on there. Next slide, please. The previous data support this message. Australia is a very sought out location for clinical trials. We have been number 3 with the highest clinical trial density when compared with selected countries by the Statistical Research Department, and highest density of trials in the APAC region. This trial activity increases and continues, and even during the pandemic, it's fair to say we have continued conducting clinical trials in all areas pretty much uninterrupted, or if not, putting in place COVID-safe regulations and trials, trying to keep on pace and trying to make a difference to people's and patients' life. Next slide, please. And as you can see, as the trials have been going on, oncology has been one of our favorite trial areas, and in Queensland also being the sunshine capital and also the skin cancer capital, as I can say sometimes, but the trials have been pretty much mostly in the oncology space, followed by neurology, infectious diseases, respiratory. Next slide, please. And this one, as was summarized in Austrade, why partnering with Australia, it shows the trial numbers, and there is an equal trials by industry sponsored, and there's a number of trials by government or research institutes. But you can see there's a lot of investigator-led trials that are happening, as well as industry-sponsored trials. So we are quite active, and again, this one emphasizes the trials, the strengths in oncology, infectious diseases, cardiovascular, and metabolic disorders. Next slide, please. And this was a Queensland Health internal presentation report where we could see that most of the trials where we are seeing in Australia are pretty much in phase 1, phase 2 trials where we've got very significant strengths, and those numbers are very much increasing. And, and again, we welcome opportunities in these areas for phase 1, phase 2 as compared to phase 3, phase 4, which have been an ongoing strengths with trials. Next slide, please. Whilst we're talking about physical trials in hospitals and other things, what we want to bring to you is COVID has also emphasized trials using teletrials. And again, we are having, Australia is leading the way in teletrials. Within Australia, Queensland again has been leading the way. And to summarize that opportunity, we recently won a 75.2 million grant from the National Medical Research Futures Fund, MRFF, to implement the Australasian teletrials model across Australia, which is led by Queensland. And there's going to be a number of modes across Australia. And this is hopefully will be driving commercial investment in clinical trials across Australia, where the trials are bringing much closer to home. So trying to say is we're not just doing trials in a clinical setting, but trials can be now done, patients can be reached through to teletrials and much closer, which integrates both rural Australia and metropolitan Australia in bringing trials together. So we get a more diverse population participating in trials. Next slide, please. So this comes to my cell and trying to say why we should consider doing clinical trials in Australia. Sophisticated medical research environment and skilled workforce. We have access to excellent key opinion leaders, both in research and clinical experts across our universities and hospitals. Excellent world-class healthcare system supported by Medicare, private healthcare systems, and we've got fantastic public and private hospital systems, and patients can be accessed across both for a particular trial. Summing all that up together, we have a very robust regulatory framework, a notification scheme for clinical trials. And once these trials are undertaken in Australia across the system, the data from Australian clinical trials is accepted in key jurisdictions, be it the FDA, the European system. And what more important is the intellectual property. Everyone's worried about what happens to their IP system. We have such a robust IP regulatory framework that it's very well protected. Whilst those are from the clinical trial aspect of it, we have a government, both at the federal and state government, that is very supportive of the sector. And they're working on continuously on improving government reforms and policies that support clinical trials. Funding through the Medical Research Futures Fund, which is a $20 billion fund, which has been established across the medical and clinical trials, NHMRC. And likewise, Australian state governments, each state government have got different schemes. Specifically, I can speak from a Queensland government point of view, where we have the best payroll tax concessions for companies to come and do clinical trials. Over here, we've got a number of industry attraction funds and partnership grants through the Advanced Queensland Initiative to date. And these help for overseas companies or interstate companies to come and do clinical trials over here. Supported by this, what I'll touch upon is the research and development tax incentives for clinical trials, which is by the federal government. And I'll touch upon this more detailed. Next slide, please. But before I go to that R&D tax incentive, I do want to touch upon, I said, we have got an excellent universities medical research system. And I want to touch upon a couple of examples out over here in Queensland. One is the TRI, the Princess Alexandra Hospital Precinct, where we've got the Translational Research Institute, which brings upon 4 Queensland organizations, the University of Queensland, Queensland University of Technology, where Jyotsna works and Shiv Shankar, the next speaker, works, the Queensland Health, and also the Mater Medical Research Institute, which is a private institute together where translational research happens. We have on site Patheon, which is part of Thermo Fisher, which can do contract manufacturing, and within the Princess Alexandra Hospital, where we have a fully integrated digital hospital and clinical research facilities and clinical trial facilities, where you can see on one side, you can start from research, manufacturing, and clinical trials happen. And there is a very good intersection of academia, research, and clinical side that's happening. And a number of trials happen up over there. Next slide, please. Likewise, a bit north across the river, we have the Queensland Institute of Medical Research, RBWH, Q-PHARM, QGen, PRECINCT, where we have the Medical Research Institute, the public hospital nucleus network, which was previously called Q-PHARM, which is one of the leading phase 1 clinical trials unit with a 62-bed dedicated facility based up over here, dedicated for phase 1 trials, and QGen, which does a lot of cell and gene therapy manufacturing, TGA licensed, GMP manufactured. Again, a very well integrated site where you can do research and clinical trials and integrates the public health system together. So we have that across in the Gold Coast and also in the Sunshine Coast. Next slide, please. So coming to the R&D tax incentives, and there's been a lot of changes in the past, but why I'm emphasizing on this is very attractive for overseas-based companies to come and do clinical trials over here. As an example, one of the reports which says undertaking early phase trials in Australia approximately is 60% cheaper than USA after the companies can take tax incentives. What does that mean is, to date, with current legislation, companies can get a refundable 43.5% on their tax rebates and a non-refundable 38.5% for eligible companies. There's a new legislation that comes in effect from 1st July 2021. So I would encourage companies who want to undertake clinical trials or organization to reach out to a number of us in Australia to understand this regulatory change and what does that mean for them in terms of cash benefits and also with whom they can do trials out over here. And we can help in putting connections to you to make sure you get these benefits for you. Next slide, please. How do we get some specific information? And here I'm going to say there's portals like the Victorian Clinical Trials Gateway, the Clinical Trials New South Wales Gateway, which is initiatives where you can see, you go into these portals, you can understand what's the landscape within each of those states. Then we recently launched what's called as the Queensland Clinical Trials Portal last week, an initiative of Queensland Health. Again, this is a one-stop shop gateway for clinical trials into each state, where you can navigate who the service providers are, what the different sites are, what their capabilities are. And LSQ, through the Queensland Clinical Trials Network, can help you access this information. So please do reach out to us. Whilst I was talking about state-based initiatives, I want to bring to you and to your attention Health Match, a New South Wales-based startup, which recently raised $18 million. I think it's this last week. What this trial does is matches patients to clinical trial sites. What was 8,000 people before COVID, they've got now 80,000 people who have registered to get themselves matched to active clinical trials across Australia. So you can see how this is integrating with the wider clinical trial ecosystem. Fantastic opportunity. And then the Australian Clinical Trials website, which gives you access to a much more wider information on the clinical trials landscape. So there are opportunities for people to undertake trials over here, researchers who are keen, hospitals, clinicians to do that with you. Next slide, please. So summing up over here is, this is a site, I put together some key websites and places where you can access information about R&D tax incentives or the regulatory landscape through the TGA, or MTP Connect, which gives a bit more information broadly about the biotech and the pharma sector. So I encourage people to go out to these sites or contact me, and I'd be more than happy to help you out to put you in the right direction with who you can undertake your clinical trials with. Next slide, please. And I know I've put in a lot of information for you to digest, but shortage of time. But what I'm trying to take home message is you should consider Australia as your destination for your phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials. And we are there to help you. And we would love to work with India and basically make sure there's a lot more collaborations happening between India and Australia in the biomedical sector. So at that, I would like to say thank you. Next slide, please. And those are my contact details for anyone who would like to reach out, and I would be more than happy to help you all. Thank you all. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Nagaraj. What can I say? It was simply amazing. It was very insightful, and I learned a lot by listening to it, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes. I know Nagaraj for a long time, and he has been putting lots of efforts in bringing clinical trials to India, from India to Australia, and vice versa as well. So it's really a great opportunity to have him here today speaking about this, and really enjoyed it. And I'm really thankful that you're making your slides available to us. So,
yes,
you know, there's a lot of information to go through, and they will be really a good source for the future as well. But Tanya, that also reminds me that I have been very much involved in Indo-Australian biotechnology conferences. Mm-hmm. So we organize these conferences every year, 1 year in Australia and 1 year in India. These conferences has been a very key to collaboration between Australian and Indian researchers and clinician scientists as well. And I'm not sure, Nagaraj, if you have attended, but Mario, who is the previous CEO of the LSQ, has attended that conference as well. And Shiv has been part of that as well, who is our next speaker, and I'm sure we will be delighted to welcome him.
It's amazing. There's so much of opportunities there. It's a matter of making people aware, understanding what opportunities, understanding where to source, take the information from, and you making the slides available and discuss, and cooperating with us is just simply great. Thank you so much, Nagaraj. We are open for questions. If there's any questions from the viewers, please feel free to pop that, and I'm sure we'll be able to, if time permits, we would be able to assist.
And also, just very quickly, I'll just add TIQ in Bangalore and Austrade in India. There's a couple of people I can see, like Gitesh Agarwal and Sangeeta Krishnamurthy, both from those organizations who are champions in this space. So please do reach out to them to engage in those further collaborations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nagaraj. Now, I can't wait to hear from Dr. Shivashankar, who is a senior research fellow from the Queensland, from the QET, and he's going to take us through some of the very important and amazing aspects that's health tech startups and how India should take leverage on it. So let me welcome Shivashankar Nagaraj to the panel, please. Over to you, Shivashankar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Tanya and Jyotsna. It's just fantastic to be speaking in this very special and unique forum. And I thank AIBC for this opportunity to talk in this forum. I am from Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane. So Nagaraj touched upon the clinical trials aspect of it. And what I plan to do is really dovetail my talk around precision medicine, genomics, and digital technologies. I think it's, the time is now. It's just fantastic to look at how we can come together in terms of in this particular aspect. So before we go into the details, I want to give you a sense of what I have done before with Australia and India. Next slide, please. So I just like Jyotsna, actively collaborated with India over many years. About 2010, I was a delegate from CSIR, which is equivalent to CSIR organization in India. And we visited a number of different institutes, and we set up new collaborations, and we connected a lot of researchers from Australia to India and vice versa. I've also organized conferences at IASC in Bangalore, in cancer space, which is my area of research. And also awareness program, what you see here on the right was very recent, thanks to Australia-India Council grant that I was fortunate to have with other colleagues at QUT. And I've been linking a lot of academics and industries from both countries, and have created a lot of jobs on both sides. And we particularly help younger people who are looking for PhD opportunities, or we have also looked at how students from here can visit India and all of this. As we speak, what you see in the bottom is software. It's a software that identifies blood groups from genomic data. So my group here in Queensland University of Technology is transforming the transfusion medicine area by trying to replace the serology-based test for blood typing into genomics-based blood typing. I don't really have time to go into this, but there are 36 blood groups, some very rare, extremely difficult to find donors, and when someone needs them, people from New Zealand have to go to Canada to get it. So what we have done is, we have, for the first time, it's an international first sort of effort where we have got a lot of population data, and we have developed this software for the first time. And this is a demonstration of how closely we work with India. RBC is what we call, so this is currently being used at National Institute of Immunohematology in Mumbai. And the idea is Mumbai will use, so this is a national laboratory who is sort of the central institute for the transfusion medicine. Through our software and our discovery, what will happen now is the blood groups will be identified through genomics in different states in India. And NIH will implement this RBC software within their systems. And we are also training their staff, etc. And it's really both ways. My own students will go to NIH, and we have a lot of crosstalk between them. So all of this is really just not on ourselves, as Nagaraj mentioned, through PIQ Queensland and also DFAT, who we actively communicate here who facilitate. Particularly Austrade is extremely active, and Sangeeta Krishnamurthy that we're talking about is very, very active in this area. Next slide, please. So in the next 5 or 6 minutes, what I want to really demonstrate is to show that both countries, Australia and India, have been actively investing in genomics. We are seeing this big shift from where we were 10 years ago, and now the cost is coming down. In different contexts, both countries have invested enormously. What we have done here in Australia is sort of, we are very fast in implementing the research into the clinical aspect. So Australian government has invested close to $1 billion. Again, Nagaraj touched a little bit on this. What you see on your left is just through few organizations or programs, the national programs in which this is delivered. So Australian Genomic Health Alliance, Bioplatforms, Queensland Health, and NHMRC, just for some examples. And I'm just showing you 2 examples, McKinsey mission and Genomics Health Future mission. So McKinsey mission, for the first time, will screen 10,000 Australian couples for rare genetic disorders. And this is, pre-screening, either during pregnancy or in early pregnancy stages, to capture any rare diseases. This is a big effort. In a sense, it's about $20 million. It's based in Sydney. and a little bit in Victoria. And the idea is to use reproductive carrier screening and to help in identification of rare diseases. On the other hand, I would say we are really the leaders in oncology, and particularly so many clinical trials running in oncology. I strongly feel precision medicine in oncology is a great synergistic sort of area between Australia and India, where Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai and others who are actively looking at cancer would be a fantastic opportunity for both countries to work in the space. So what you see here is a $500 million investment in rare disease and tackling complex cancers. Just to give you an example, here in PA Hospital, every new patient who comes in oncology, we are now doing whole exome sequencing of those patients. So genetics and genomics is really integrated into the system, and if they don't survive the chemo or radio, and if it is a bit more complex than the usual cancer therapy, what we do is we try to see which are the open clinical trials across the country, and we try to help the patients. So this is happening, and I'm in the tumor board, and I look at about 10 to 12 patients every week, the reports, and sit with the clinicians who actually treat them in the PA hospital. And as genomic scientists, we talk about the mutations and what are the open clinical trials and how we do this. So we have a lot of experience in actually managing the clinical trials in cancer space, which is focused on genomics. Next slide, please. So the next aspect is digital health. And this is, again, one more sort of footprint for us, because we have been collecting this data for 30 years. In the sense, it is centralized, and the hospital, through a system called Medicare here, we collect data systematically for a particular patient. And this is in different contexts. What you see here on the slide is really two examples. The first example is a COVID project that was recently launched at QUT. And here, what you see is also how systematically the data is being collected. When there is an initial exposure to the onset of symptoms, present to the primary care, and then what you see is on the top is really the patient journey towards either being critically ill or possibly death or discharge, or is there a reinfection. Now just imagine the bottom is really enormous data. So which means that there is a lot of emphasis on collection of data, and this data is important for clinical trials as well as understanding the disease itself. And therefore there is a lot of investment in trying to collect this data, analyze this data, roll out this data, and centralize all of this. And Queensland, for example, we have Queensland Health, through which all of this happens in the government hospitals. And in some specific cases or specific disciplines, the private hospitals are very closely linked to government hospitals, and the data is shared and everything happens in a very synergistic way. And now I present this as a great opportunity for India to work with, because I'm aware of some new startup companies who are developing AI technologies in India who may need very structured data, who may need a lot of data. And to demonstrate that, what you see here is a second example, which is a breast cancer screening. And as you may be aware, Australia is one of the highest breast cancer countries in the world, and we have to deal with significant burden of breast cancer in the country. And what government has done here again is has set up multiple screening centers in every state and based on different mechanisms. So I just want to give you a sense of once even a healthy individual or a patient comes to these centers, the screening happens, the MRI, the CT, and the different ways in which the screening happens, it's all collected and it's centralized. So for imagine an AI project where you need imaging, we have close to 1.5 million images of these patients. So this is extraordinary amount of data that can be integrated into research projects, into clinical trials, and really how both countries can try to tackle this. Next slide, please.
It's amazing that how you touched about data is gold, and it's absolutely right. I think we are pressured for time.
Okay, I will take only 1 minute, Tanya, and I'll finish. I just have one more slide to go. So just showing one or two examples of digital health, the AI kind of project, which is clinical trials. And Health Match, Nagaraj touched upon this. I'm not going to repeat it, but Max Kelsen is a top AI company. You may wish to contact them on that and cancer trials. Just next slide, please. So very quickly, we both have national capabilities in our own areas. So trained workforce, international reputation on Indian side, preclinical research, for example, Syngene. And so when you sort of bring this together, there is a lot of ways in which we could work together. I think I'll leave with the final slide, which is quite important. So some things never change. That's my picture with Mr. Amitabh Bachchan when he was given honorary doctorate at QUT, and it still continues to be one of my favorite pictures. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You know, it's so much of exciting opportunities, so many new things that we have learned. Not just us, viewers would also be able to take advantage of what you have discussed. Thank you so much, Shiv Shankar. With that, I'm going to hand over the panel of our panel over to Mr. Jim Varghese, who are National Chair, to take on from here to introduce Amitabh Bhavia.
Thanks very much, Shannon. Thanks for that very rich panel discussion and dialogue with lots of very, very valuable information. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amitabh, who is the Head Regulatory Affairs with GGD India. And as you can see from the profile, it's a very impressive career with 24 years of experience in the India farming industry. And Amitabh, very pleased that you could join us. And if I could ask you to keep your presentation to no more than 10 minutes, that would be very good. Thanks very much. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. And firstly, let me thank AIBC and FICCI for inviting me for this webinar. It's a great opportunity for me, and last 1 hour has been extremely enriching experience for me to know what best India and Australia could collaborate. For next few minutes or so, I'll be sharing my thoughts on an interesting topic for all of us, use of artificial intelligence in clinical trial. And it's so apt for our today's theme, which is like shaping the future of clinical trial. So as a regulatory professional, I mean, nothing new, but I would like to re-emphasize that the successful development of a new drug, it takes about 10 to 15 years and costs about nothing like $2 billion USD. And clinical trials actually consume almost half of the time and the cost. And today, the high failure rates of clinical trial are the major obstacle, I would say, in successful, or more importantly, fast drug development. The traditional approach of clinical development is a lengthy process with about 10% success rate, which means about 10% of the drugs entering the CTs end up seeking regulatory approval from the major regulators. So what are the cost drivers in clinical trial? The real cost drivers in clinical trials are patient recruitment, site recruitment, patient retention, data management, site retention, so on and so forth. And the major ones out of this are really patient recruitment, which occupies about 32% of the cost. And also, in addition, the patient retention monitoring become the key parameters. And this is exactly where I think the artificial intelligence has a major role to play in your future. artificial intelligence has the potential to help in overcoming the limitations of current clinical trial process. The machine learning can automatically detect patterns of meaning in large databases. The NLP, or the natural language processing, can comprehend and correlate the diverse content like the written or the spoken language of patients. So such AI capabilities can be useful in analyzing and correlating the large or the diverse medical information that we have from the electronic medical records, also from medical literature or the clinical trial registries. The application of AI actually in CT relates to the exploitation of data from the electronic medical records or electronic health records and the clinical trial data, and employing a variety of high-tech approaches to oversee the CT process. Now, what is an important piece here is to get a good quality data out of this veracity, and the volume of EMR data is a real big task, and that sometimes becomes a major stumbling block in the implementation of AI for CTs. In developing countries, even countries like India, in some pockets, the detailed documentation of medical history and the treatment is frequently missing with some patients. So if there are gaps in the EMR records or the medical history, then it becomes difficult to really come up with AI solution. I'll touch upon the next important piece on patient retention and patient monitoring. In clinical trial, the patient drop out for a variety of reasons because the burden of protocol, today's complex protocols, is quite high on patients to capture data, to capture symptoms, adverse events, patient diaries, and follow-up visits. What one could utilize moving forward is patient monitoring, becoming an important parameter for study success rate. AI can really facilitate the CT conduct by doing a regular monitoring of participants. And this can improve adherence to protocol requirements, encourage retention of participants or the patients, and lead to more reliable or efficient assessment. I'll just take you through a couple of devices that are used, like artificial intelligence coupled with wearable sensors. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. Like, these are the devices that can execute data processing tasks and is fully functional while attached to the human body, and also video monitoring. Now, these are some of the assets that one could use using AI and can obtain the real-time individual patient data and lessen the patient burden. Such techniques actually help automatically and continuously collect data, patient data, and this to some extent will relieve patient of this big task of collecting the data. AI with wearable technology offers new methods of mobile real-time personal trial monitoring mechanism. Also, what one could do to avoid missing visits, e-tracking of missed clinic visits, and that can further trigger non-adherence alerts if possible. So these are some of the ways that one could use AI in monitoring. Another important piece, medication adherence and retention. That's again another critical factor in clinical trials. So one could enhance adherence to protocol through smartphone alerts and reminders. E-tracking of medication again is becoming a very important tool now that could be done using the smart pill boxes and tools for visual confirmation of treatment compliance. So investigator and the site team sitting anywhere in the world could really do the visual confirmation of the treatment compliance. Having said this, are they perfect? No, the wearable technology and devices also face a challenge of interoperability and standardization of data and methodology. In again developing countries like India, the literacy could become a major challenge in the deployment of such devices, although most investigator sites and patients now have this capacity to use it. AI can also improve clinical cycle times while reducing cost and burden of clinical development. Recently, FDA has published guidance on enrichment strategies for drug effectiveness and its use along with AI. And there are three important strategies US FDA has really highlighted. What is said is that machine learning and AI methods can be applied to analyze, interpret multiple data sources, including the real world data or the electronic health records. What they highlight is the three important strategies. One is reduced patient heterogeneity. What I mean here is one could use a biomarker verification to reduce the variability, the patient heterogeneity, and increase the study power. The second strategy that the FDA has highlighted is the prognostic enrichment. What it means really is selecting patients who are more likely to have measurable clinical endpoints. Not to confuse with the degree of success, what it means here is recruiting a high number of suitable patients, and who are likely to meet the measurable clinical endpoints. And the third strategy that FDA has really guided on AI is also on predictive enrichment, which means that identifying patients who are more likely to respond to the treatment with the same disease. So finally, the utility of AI technology in clinical trial is yet to be proven and validated in a very comprehensive, ethical, replicable, and scalable way for pharma companies and also for regulators. But I must say that from completed or failed trials, there is a huge amount of data available on the clinical trial design, on the success rate, the failure reasons, and that can become a great source of AI algorithms. Finally, in the interest of time, I'll close by saying, to conclude, the artificial intelligence technologies in clinical trials may be adopted in clinical trial ecosystem step by step, making trials faster, while at the same time, hopefully lowering failure rates and R&D costs. So I think in the short period of time, this is what I could touch upon on the major aspects of use of AI in clinical trial. And I'm sure moving forward in different sections, I mean, in different period time intervals, we will have to adopt these technologies if we really want to have the good success rate and lower the failure rates, and finally reduce R&D costs for clinical trials. So that's it from my end. Once again, thank you so much, AIBC and FICCI, to invite me for this webinar, and it was a great opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Amit. I really appreciate that, and keeping it within the time. That was excellent. Can I, without further ado, ask Vish to do a vote of thanks? Over to you, Vish, as we're now running into negative time. Over to you.
First of all, thank you so much for all the panelists, and it's a very highly informative session. And on behalf of the AIB and Mr. Jim Burgess, the National Chair, and also the entire AIBC team, there are a number of people involved. I don't have time to mention their names. Would like to thank you, and then we would like to particularly thank the national sponsor, NIB Insurance, Maria, and also the industry partner, FICCI, Mr. Gaurav Watson Vaishali, and the number of keynote speakers, including Dr. Dinesh Palipanna, Dr. Jyotsna Batra, Dr. Shiv Shankar, Dr. Nagaraj Gopisetti, and Amita Bhave, who come especially from India. And so I would like to definitely thank all the participants from Australia and overseas. And I also would like to thank great support and creative support from the back office support team, Wendy Farrell, Vishal Kumar, and Sam Dutt. Apologies if I missed out anyone. And wishing you a Merry Christmas and a safe COVID-free next year. And have a great evening, and look forward to your participation in future AIBC events in the next year or so. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Vish, as we now conclude this very, very informative webinar. And it's been a pleasure to work with FICCI as well as our partner NIB. And can I thank once again all of you for attending this very important webinar. And on behalf of AIBC, we look forward to continuing this engagement and to see some really good business outcomes at the end of the day. So good afternoon and good evening. Namaste, namaskaram.